Warning: the following story contains descriptions of graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back to Sleeper Cell 41. Today we're getting ready to dive into a chapter of history that is often overlooked but incredibly important. Picture this. It's the early 20th century in the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's a vibrant hub of African American success and prosperity, known as Black Wall Street. But beneath the surface, tensions are simmering, fueled by racial discrimination and inequality. Then in 1921, things take a tragic turn as a series of events led to one of the deadliest acts of racial violence in American history. In this episode, we will be shedding light on this dark chapter, exploring the causes, the impact, and the resilience of the community. This is the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre. The Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as the Tulsa Race Riot or the Black Wall Street Massacre, was a 2-day-long white supremacist terrorist massacre that took place between May 31st and June 1st of 1921, when mobs of white residents, some of who had been appointed as deputies and armed by city government officials, attacked black residents and destroyed homes and businesses of the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The event is considered one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. The attackers burned and destroyed more than 35 square blocks of the neighborhood, at the time one of the wealthiest black communities in the United States, colloquially known as Black Wall Street. In 1921, Oklahoma had a racially, socially, and politically tense atmosphere. The territory of northern Oklahoma had been established for the forced resettlement of Native Americans from the southeast, some of whom had owned slaves. The first black inhabitants of the Indian Territory were those who came as enslaved people with their native owners. Other areas had received many settlers from the South whose families had been slaveholders before the Civil War. Oklahoma was admitted as a state on November 16, 1907. The newly created state legislature passed racial segregation laws, commonly known as Jim Crow laws, in its first order of business. The 1907 Oklahoma Constitution did not call for strict segregation. Delegates feared that, should they include such restrictions, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt would veto the document. Still, the first law passed by the new legislature segregated all rail travel and voter registration rules, effectively disenfranchised non-whites. This meant that they were also barred from either serving on juries or serving in local public offices. These laws were enforced until they were ruled unconstitutional after the passage of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. Major cities passed laws that imposed additional restrictions. On August 4th, 1916, Tulsa passed an ordinance that mandated residential segregation by forbidding members of either race from residing on any block where 3/4 or more of the residents were members of the other race. Although the United States Supreme Court declared such an ordinance unconstitutional the following year, Tulsa and many other cities continued to establish and enforce segregation for the next 3 decades. Social tensions and white supremacist sentiment increased in cities where job competition was fierce. An economic slump in northeastern Oklahoma increased the level of unemployment. The Civil War, which ended in 1865, was still in living memory. The Civil Rights Act for African Americans were lacking. The Ku Klux Klan was resurgent. Since 1915, the Ku Klux Klan had been growing in urban chapters across the country. Its first significant appearance in Oklahoma occurred on August 12, 1921. By the end of 1921, 3,200 of Tulsa's 72,000 residents were Klan members, according to one estimate. In the early 20th century, lynchings were common in Oklahoma as part of a continuing effort to assert and maintain white supremacy. By 1921, at least 31 people, mostly men and boys, had been lynched in the newly formed state, 26 of whom were black. At the same time, black veterans pushed to have their civil rights enforced, believing that they had earned full citizenship as the result of their military service. In what became known as the Red Summer of 1919, industrial cities across the Midwest and Northeast experienced severe race riots, in which whites attacked black communities, sometimes with the assistance of local authorities. As a booming oil city, Tulsa also supported a large number of affluent, educated, and professional African American residents. Greenwood was a district in Tulsa that was organized in 1906, following Booker T. Washington's 1905 tour of Arkansas, Indian Territory, and Oklahoma. It was a namesake of the Greenwood District, which Washington had established as its own district in Tuskegee, Alabama, 5 years earlier. Greenwood became so prosperous that it also became known as the Negro Wall Street, now commonly referred to as the Black Wall Street. Most black people lived together in the district. Black Americans had created their own businesses and service in this enclave, including several grocers, 2 newspapers, 2 movie theaters, nightclubs, and numerous churches. Black professionals, including doctors, dentists, and lawyers, and clergy, served the community. During this trip to Tulsa in 1905, Washington encouraged the cooperation, economic independence, and excellence being demonstrated there. Greenwood residents selected their own leaders and raised capital there to support their economic growth. In surrounding areas of northeastern Oklahoma, they also enjoyed relative prosperity and participated in the oil boom. On May 30th, 1921, 19-year-old Dick Rowland, a black shoe shiner who was employed at a Main Street shine parlor, entered the only elevator in the nearby Drexel building at 319 South Main Street in order to use the top floor colored restroom, which his employer had arranged for use by his black employees. There, he encountered Sarah Page, the 17-year-old white elevator operator who was on duty. Whether and to what extent Rowland and Page knew each other has long been a matter of speculation. The two likely knew each other at least by sight because Rowland would have regularly ridden in Page's elevator on his way to and from the restroom. A clerk at Renberg's, a clothing store on the first floor of the Drexel, heard what sounded like a woman scream and saw a young black man rushing from the building. The clerk went to the elevator and found Page in a distraught state. Thinking that she had been sexually assaulted, he summoned the authorities. Apart from the clerk's interpretation that Rowland had attempted to rape Page, many explanations have been given for the incident, with the most common explanation being that Rowland tripped as he got onto the elevator, and as he tried to catch his fall, he grabbed onto the arm of Page, who then screamed. Others suggested that Rowland and Page had a lover's quarrel. On the morning after the incident, Henry Carmichael, a white detective, and Henry C. Pack, a black patrolman, located Rowland on Greenwood Avenue and detained him. Rowland was initially taken to the Tulsa City Jail at the corner of 1st Street and Main Street. Later that day, Police Commissioner J. M. Atkinson said he had received an anonymous telephone call threatening Rowland's life. He ordered Rowland transferred to the more secure jail on the top floor of the Tulsa County Courthouse. Rowland was well known among attorneys and other legal professionals within the city. Many of them knew him through his work as a shoe shiner. Some witnesses later recounted hearing several attorneys defend Rowland in their conversations with one another. One of them said, "Why, I know that boy, and have known him a good while. That's not in him," unquote. The afternoon edition of the Tribune hit the streets shortly after 3 p.m., and soon news spread of the potential lynching by 4 p.m. Local authorities were on alert. White residents began congregating at their near Tulsa County Courthouse. By sunset, around 7:30 p.m., the several hundred white residents assembled outside the courthouse appeared to have the makings of a lynch mob. Willard M. McCullough, the newly elected sheriff of Tulsa County, was determined to avoid events such as 1920 lynching of white murder suspect Roy Belton in Tulsa, which had occurred during the term of his predecessor. The sheriff took steps to ensure the safety of Rowland. McCullough organized his deputies to a defensive formation around Rowland, who was terrified. The Guthrie Daily Leader reported that Rowland had been taken to the county jail before crowds started to gather. The sheriff positioned 6 of his men, armed with rifles and shotguns, on the roof of the courthouse. He disabled the building's elevator and had his remaining men barricade themselves at the top of the stairs with orders to shoot any intruders on sight. The sheriff went outside and tried to talk the crowd into going home, but to no avail. According to an account by Scott Ellsworth, the sheriff was, quote, hooted down. At about 8:20 p.m., 3 white men entered the courthouse, demanding that Rowland be turned over to them. Although vastly outnumbered by the growing crowd on the street, Sheriff McCullough turned them away. A few blocks away on Greenwood Avenue, members of the black community gathered to discuss the situation at Gurley's Hotel. Given the recent lynching of Belton, a white man accused of murder, they believed that Rowland was greatly at risk. Many black residents were determined to prevent the crowd from lynching Rowland, but they were divided about tactics. Young World War I veterans prepared for a battle by collecting guns and ammunition. Older, more prosperous men feared a destructive confrontation that likely would cost them dearly. O.W. Gurley stated that he had tried to convince the men that there would be no lynching, but the crowd responded that Sheriff McCullough had personally told them their presence was required. About 9:30 p.m., a group of approximately 50 to 60 black men armed with rifles and shotguns arrived at the jail to support the sheriff and his deputies in defending Rowland from the mob. Corroborated by 10 witnesses, Attorney James Luther submitted to the grand jury that they were following the orders of Sheriff McCullough, who publicly denied he gave any orders. Quote, "I saw a car full of Negroes driving through the street with guns. I saw Bill McCullough and told him those Negroes would cause trouble. Bill McCullough tried to talk to them, and when they got out and stood single file, W.G. Daggs was killed near Boulder and 6th Street. I was under the impression that a man with authority could have stopped and disarmed them. I saw a chief of police on the south side of the courthouse on the top step talking. I did not see any officer except the chief. I walked in the courthouse and met McCullough in about 15 feet of his door. I told him these Negroes are going to make trouble, and he said he had told them to go home. He went out and told the whites to go home, and one said, 'They said you told them to come up here.' McCullough said, 'I did not,' and the Negro said, 'You did tell us to come.'" The most widely reported and corroborated inciting incident occurred as the group of black men left when an elderly white man approached O.B. Mann, a black man, and demanded that he hand over his pistol. Mann refused, and the old man attempted to disarm him. A gunshot went off, and then, according to the sheriff's reports, all hell broke loose. The two groups shot at each other until midnight, when the group of black men were greatly outnumbered and forced to retreat to Greenwood. At the end of the exchange of gunfire, 12 people were dead, 10 white, 2 black. Alternatively, other eyewitnesses' account was that the shooting began down the street from the courthouse, when black business owners came to the defense of a lone black man being attacked by a group of around 6 white men. It is possible that the eyewitness did not recognize the fact that this incident was occurring as part of a rolling gunfight that was already underway. As news of the violence spread throughout the city, mob violence exploded. White rioters invaded Greenwood that night and the next morning, killing men and burning and looting stores and homes. Around noon on June 1st, the Oklahoma National Guard imposed martial law, ending the massacre. About 10,000 black people were left homeless, and the cost of property damage amounted to more than $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property, equivalent to $38.43 million in 2024. By the end of 1922, most of the residents' homes had been rebuilt, but the city and real estate companies refused to compensate them. Many survivors left Tulsa, while residents who chose to stay in the city, regardless of race, largely kept silent about the terror, violence, and resulting losses for decades. The massacre was largely omitted from local, state, and national histories for years. In 1996, 75 years after the massacre, a bipartisan group in the state legislature authorized the formation of the Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. The commission's final report, published in 2001, states that the city had conspired with the racist mob. It recommended a program of reparations to survivors and their descendants. The state passed legislation to establish scholarships for the descendants of survivors, encouraging the economic development of Greenwood, and develop a park in the memory of the victims of the Massacre of Tulsa. The park was dedicated in 2010. Schools in Oklahoma have been required to teach students about the massacre since 2002, and in 2020, the massacre officially became a part of the Oklahoma school curriculum. For more content, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.